September 3, 1931, Chicago. 8-year-old Elizabeth Morrison was kidnapped at 3 p.m. while walking home from school. Her father, Robert Morrison, was one of Chicago's wealthiest businessmen, owner of a steel company, and worth millions. By 6 p.m., a ransom note arrived demanding $100,000, an astronomical sum in 1931. The note warned, "Pay within 48 hours or the child dies." The Chicago Police Department mobilized every available detective, but they had no leads, no witnesses, no idea where to even start looking. The Morrison family was desperate. But that evening, when the news reached Al Capone's headquarters, something unexpected happened. Capone, the man newspapers called Public Enemy Number 1, slammed his fist on his desk so hard the wood cracked. "Find them!" he told his men, his voice cold with rage. "Find them in 24 hours. And when you do, bring them to me alive." Nobody in that room asked why Capone cared about a rich man's daughter. They knew the rule. The one rule Capone never broke: you don't hurt kids, ever. And whoever took Elizabeth Morrison had just violated that rule. They had 48 hours to return her. Capone would find them in 24. And what happened next would become Chicago's most carefully hidden secret. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because in upcoming episodes, we'll be telling other extraordinary stories about the hidden code of honor in Chicago's underworld. The kidnapping, a line crossed. Elizabeth Morrison was a quiet, studious child who loved reading and drawing. She attended a private school on the North Side, one of Chicago's safest, wealthiest neighborhoods. Every day, her driver would take her to school in the morning and pick her up at 3 p.m. But on September 3rd, the driver was sick, and Elizabeth's mother decided to let her walk the 4 blocks home. It was a beautiful afternoon. The streets were busy with people, and the route was through one of Chicago's most respectable areas. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. Somewhere between the school and her home, Elizabeth vanished. A witness later reported seeing a black car pull up next to a little girl matching Elizabeth's description, seeing the girl get into the car willingly, as if she knew the person inside, and then the car drove away. That was at 3:15 p.m. By 3:30, when Elizabeth hadn't arrived home, her mother began to worry. By 4 p.m., she was frantic. By 5 p.m., police were searching the neighborhood. The ransom note arrived at 6 p.m., delivered by a street kid who said a man gave him $1 to bring it to the Morrison house. The note was made from cut-out newspaper letters, the classic kidnapping style designed to prevent handwriting identification. The message was brief and terrifying. "We have your daughter. $100,000 in unmarked bills. Instructions will follow. You have 48 hours from receipt of this note. Contact police and she dies. Try to find us and she dies. Pay the money and she lives. Fail to pay and you will never see her again." The note was signed with a simple X. Robert Morrison read it 3 times, his hands shaking. His wife collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Their world had become a nightmare in the space of 3 hours. Despite the note's warning, Morrison called the police immediately. He was a powerful man with connections, and he believed law enforcement could save his daughter. Chicago Police Chief John Steig personally took charge of the case. Steig was an honest cop, one of the few in Chicago's notoriously corrupt police department, and he genuinely wanted to help. But he also knew the grim statistics. Most kidnapping victims who weren't returned within the first 24 hours were never found alive. The kidnappers had the advantage. They could be anywhere in Chicago, or even out of state by now. Without witnesses, without clues, without any idea who they were dealing with, the police were essentially helpless. Steig put 50 detectives on the case, but 50 men searching a city of 3 million people was like looking for a needle in a haystack. And the clock was ticking. Capone hears the news. The Code Al Capone heard about the kidnapping that same evening. He was having dinner at the Lexington Hotel with several of his top men when one of his informants, a newspaper reporter on Capone's payroll, rushed in with the story. The reporter explained the situation. Wealthy businessman's daughter, ransom demand, police helpless. Capone listened without interrupting, his expression darkening with every detail. When the reporter finished, Capone was silent for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and said quietly, "They took a kid." Those 4 words carried a weight that everyone in the room understood. In Chicago's underworld of the 1930s, there were rules. Unwritten rules, but rules nonetheless. Criminals had codes, lines they wouldn't cross. You didn't kill civilians unnecessarily. You didn't involve churches or hospitals in your operations. You paid your debts. You didn't betray your partners. And above all, you didn't hurt children. This wasn't morality in the traditional sense. It was practicality mixed with a strange sense of honor. Hurting kids turned public opinion completely against you. made cops more determined to catch you, made even other criminals view you as scum. But for Capone, it was more than just practical. Capone had a son, Sonny, who had been born deaf and suffered health problems his whole life. Capone was fiercely protective of his son and, by extension, of all children. He had donated money to orphanages, funded children's hospitals, and made it absolutely clear to anyone who worked for him: kids are off limits. Capone turned from the window and gave orders. Get word out to every informant we have. Every bartender, every shopkeeper, every street kid on our payroll. I want information about this kidnapping. Someone saw something. Someone knows something. Find out what it is. Money is no object. Anyone who brings me useful information gets $5,000. $5,000 in 1931 was equivalent to about $90,000 today. Capone was offering a fortune for information. His men scattered immediately to spread the word through Chicago's vast network of Capone informants and associates. But Capone didn't stop there. He called in Jake Guzik, his financial genius, and the man who managed Capone's intelligence operations. Guzik was a brilliant organizer, and within an hour he had mobilized Capone's entire information network. This network was extensive. Hundreds of people throughout Chicago who provided Capone with information about everything happening in the city. It included corrupt cops who reported on police activities, bartenders who overheard conversations, cab drivers who saw things on the streets, hotel clerks who noticed suspicious guests, and even telephone operators who listened in on calls. This network, built over years and maintained at great expense, was Capone's eyes and ears. And now it was focused on one goal: find Elizabeth Morrison. The hunt. 24 hours. The information started coming in within hours. A bartender on the south side reported that 3 men he didn't recognize had been in his bar the previous evening, drinking heavily and talking about a big score coming up. A cab driver reported picking up 2 nervous men near the Morrison house on the afternoon of the kidnapping and dropping them off at a cheap hotel in the Stockyards district. A street kid reported seeing a black car matching the witness description parked behind an abandoned warehouse. Each piece of information alone meant nothing, but Capone's men were trained to see patterns. They plotted every sighting on a map, looked for connections, built a picture. By midnight, Capone's intelligence team had narrowed the search to a specific area, the Stockyards district on the south side. This was a rough neighborhood, full of slaughterhouses, warehouses, and cheap boarding houses. It was a place where strangers went unnoticed, where questions weren't asked, where someone could hide a kidnapped child. Frank Nitti, Capone's enforcer, took personal charge of the search. He divided the district into sections and assigned teams to search each one. The teams weren't looking for the girl directly. They were looking for signs of the kidnappers. A recently rented room, a car matching the description, men who didn't belong in the neighborhood. At 2 a.m., one of Capone's teams got a break. A hotel clerk, motivated by Capone's reward offer, reported that 3 men had checked into his hotel 2 days ago, paying cash for a week in advance. The men kept to themselves, never left together, and one of them had asked about getting food delivered to their room. Lots of food, more than 3 men would need. The clerk thought it was strange. Nitti went to the hotel personally with 6 men. They surrounded the building, blocked all exits, and then kicked in the door of the room where the 3 men were staying. The room was empty, but there was evidence people had been there recently. Still warm coffee, cigarette butts in the ashtray, a newspaper open to the story about the kidnapping, and on the table, a map of Chicago with certain locations circled. One of those locations was an abandoned meatpacking plant 3 blocks away. Nitti looked at the map and smiled coldly. "Got you," he whispered. He left 2 men to watch the hotel room in case the kidnappers returned, and took the rest of his team to the meatpacking plant. The plant was a massive brick building, 3 stories tall, dark and silent at 3 in the morning. Nitti and his men approached carefully. They found a side door that had been forced open recently, the lock broken. Inside, the plant was a maze of rooms, conveyor belts, and hanging hooks, everything coated in years of dust and grime. Nitti signaled his men to spread out and search quietly. They moved through the darkness, guns drawn, listening for any sound, and then one of them heard it, a child crying, somewhere above them. They had found her. The rescue, Chicago Justice. Nitti led his men up a rusted staircase to the 2nd floor. The crying was louder here, coming from a room at the end of a long corridor. Nitti approached the door, listened for a moment, then kicked it open. Inside the room, Elizabeth Morrison was tied to a chair, a dirty cloth over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She was alive but terrified, and sitting in the room, playing cards and drinking, were 2 of the kidnappers. They looked up in shock as Nitti and his men burst in. One of them reached for a gun, but Nitti was faster. He fired once, hitting the man in the shoulder. The man screamed and dropped his weapon. The other kidnapper raised his hands immediately, too frightened to fight. Nitti walked over to Elizabeth, gently removed the cloth from her mouth, and untied her. "You're safe now, sweetheart," he said softly. "We're going to take you home." Elizabeth looked up at him, not understanding who he was, but knowing somehow that the nightmare was over. One of Nitti's men gave her his jacket and picked her up. Nitti turned to the two kidnappers, now both on the floor with guns pointed at them. "Where's the third one?" he demanded. One of the kidnappers, bleeding from his shoulder, stammered, "He went to scout the ransom drop location. He'll be back in an hour." Nitti smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Good. We'll wait." He had his men tie up the two kidnappers and gag them. Then they waited in the darkness. Exactly 1 hour later, they heard footsteps on the stairs. The third kidnapper walked into the room, whistling, not expecting anything wrong. He saw Nitti and the guns pointed at him, and his face went white. He tried to run, but Nitti's men caught him before he reached the stairs. Now they had all three kidnappers. Nitti used the building's phone to call Capone. "Boss, we got the girl. She's safe. And we got all three of them." Capone's voice came back. "Bring the girl to her family immediately. Bring the men to me." Nitti understood. He sent 2 of his men to return Elizabeth to her parents, with instructions to leave her on the doorstep, ring the bell, and disappear before anyone saw them. The Morrison family would get their daughter back, safe and unharmed, and they would never know who rescued her. As for the 3 kidnappers, they were dragged to a waiting car and driven through the dark streets of Chicago to a destination they didn't know, to face a judgment they couldn't escape. The tribunal, underground justice. The kidnappers were brought to one of Capone's tunnels, deep beneath the city where no one would hear, no one would see, and no one would interfere. This particular section of tunnel had been modified into what Capone's men darkly called the courtroom, a large chamber with chairs, a table, and very good soundproofing. Capone was waiting there, sitting behind the table, perfectly calm. Frank Nitti and several other men stood against the walls. The kidnappers were forced into chairs facing Capone. Capone looked at them for a long moment without speaking. Finally, he said, "You took a child, an 8-year-old girl. You tied her up, terrified her, and planned to kill her if you didn't get your money, in my city, breaking my rules." One of the kidnappers, trying to be brave, spat back, "Your rules? Who are you to have rules? You're a criminal, same as us." Capone's expression didn't change. "No," he said quietly, "not the same. I have a code. You have nothing. What happened next in that tunnel is not fully documented. But according to accounts from Capone's men who were present, Capone conducted something like a trial. He asked the kidnappers why they did it. They admitted they needed money, saw an opportunity, thought a rich man could afford the ransom. Capone asked if they had children. 2 of them did. Capone asked how they would feel if someone took their children. They had no answer. Capone then explained his decision. "You broke the most important rule. In my world, there's punishment for that. But I'm not a monster. I'm giving you a choice. Option 1, I turn you over to the police. You'll be tried, convicted, and probably executed. Your families will be shamed. Your children will grow up knowing their father was a child kidnapper. Option 2, you leave Chicago tonight. You never come back. You change your names, start over somewhere else. If I ever hear that any of you are in Chicago again, or if I hear that any of you ever hurt another child anywhere, you won't get a third chance." The kidnappers chose option 2. They were given 1 hour to go home, pack a bag, say goodbye to their families without explaining why, and leave Chicago forever. Capone's men escorted each of them to ensure they complied. By dawn, all 3 kidnappers were on trains heading to different cities, carrying nothing but a suitcase and the memory of the night they met Al Capone and lived to tell about it, though they never would tell about it. The aftermath. Questions without answers. Elizabeth Morrison was found on her family's doorstep at 5 a.m., wrapped in a man's jacket, unharmed except for rope marks on her wrists. Her father opened the door to find her there, alone, with no sign of who brought her. Elizabeth told her parents about being rescued by men who were kind to her, who gave her food and water, who promised she would be safe. But she was 8 years old and traumatized. Her descriptions were vague. The police questioned her extensively but learned nothing useful about her rescuers. The Morrison family never paid the ransom. The kidnappers never made contact again. The case simply ended, with the victim returned safely and the perpetrators vanished. Police Chief Stiga was baffled. His detectives had found nothing, and suddenly the girl was back. He suspected someone else had intervened, someone with resources and connections the police didn't have. When reporters asked if organized crime might have been involved in the rescue, Stiga said carefully, "I can neither confirm nor deny that, but I'm grateful the child is safe." That was as close as any official would ever come to acknowledging the truth. Robert Morrison, Elizabeth's father, was a smart man. He put together what probably happened. A few weeks after his daughter's return, he tried to make a donation to one of the charities Capone was known to support. A donation of exactly $100,000, the amount of the ransom he never paid. The donation was anonymously refused and returned. Morrison understood the message. Capone hadn't done this for money or gratitude. He had done it because it was the right thing to do, at least according to the strange moral code of Chicago's underworld. The legacy: honor among criminals. The Elizabeth Morrison case became legendary in Chicago's criminal community. Though it was never widely known to the public, it established something important. There were lines even criminals wouldn't cross, and there were consequences for those who did. In the years after 1931, Chicago saw a dramatic decrease in kidnapping cases. The word had spread. Take a kid in Chicago, and you're not just facing the cops, you're facing something much worse. You're facing Capone's network, Capone's resources, and Capone's personal wrath. That was a risk no criminal wanted to take. The story also reveals something crucial about understanding criminals and crime. The world isn't divided neatly into good people and bad people. It's more complicated. Al Capone was absolutely a criminal who did terrible things, but he was also a man with his own moral code, a code that included protecting children. These two truths coexist. His good actions don't cancel his crimes, and his crimes don't erase his good actions. He was both, simultaneously, throughout his life. Today, the Elizabeth Morrison kidnapping is a footnote in Chicago history, barely mentioned in crime books, unknown to most people. But it mattered. It mattered to an 8-year-old girl who got to grow up because someone powerful decided to help her. It mattered to 3 kidnappers who got a second chance instead of a death sentence. And it mattered to Chicago because it proved that even in a city ruled by violence and corruption, there could still exist moments of unexpected mercy, delivered through the most unlikely hands.